Awesome. Well, we are back again for our first chat of 2021, and we're bringing an interesting topic, which you and I love to do, bring interesting topics. And I think you and I excel at bringing together things that seemingly don't go together.
Right.
And this one is no exception. Um, we're discussing today what athletic trainers and athletic training as a whole can learn from activist Stacy Abrams. So I'm going to give a little bit of background here just to kind of preface how we even came to this, and we will very quickly make these connections for you. So don't feel like you're going to be in the dark for long here, and we're not gonna, you know, we're not gonna keep this too mysterious for too long. So at the beginning of January, when the runoff election in Georgia was happening, I was listening to a podcast produced by the New York Times called The Daily, and they did a kind of an in-depth story on Stacy Abrams. And as I was listening to this, I had so many ping pongs going on in my head, or pinballs maybe. Like if you think about a pinball machine, you let it go and it's like bing, 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 bing. So of course I message Kent and I'm thinking, what do you think about this? How is this connecting for you? And so I sent you the podcast and you listened to it. And what was your reaction when you were listening?
Um, it was like, are they talking about athletic training? Like I knew they weren't talking about athletic training, but there were just some quotes that, not only Stacey Abrams, but really the whole movement in Georgia, some of the volunteers, they were talking, and I'm like, you could replace this runoff election with athletic training advocacy
Yes.
in several parts. So there was definitely some synergy in the types of conversations that they were having in this podcast.
Absolutely. So let me give a little bit of background here. So Black voters were integral in the Democratic vote in Georgia during the 2020 election cycle. And Stacey Abrams, along with many other volunteers and an entire coalition that she built up, so Stacy is a political figure who was basically instrumental in mobilizing the vote, specifically the Black vote. So let's look at a little bit of what her methodology was in how she mobilized this vote, and figure out, like, what does this have anything to do with athletic training? um, so Stacy used um, basically a specific methodology in order to create change in her state. And I think that as athletic trainers, and honestly, probably a lot of industries are going to be looking at her and looking at this, not just political, as sort of like a case study for how do we disrupt long held beliefs about what works and what doesn't, right? Like, is that resonating with you, Kent?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so when she entered office in the mid 2000s, and I'm just going to kind of give an overview here so that we have a backdrop. So when she entered office in the mid 2000s, basically the Democratic Party had spent the entire previous decade trying to recreate former campaigns that they were either borrowing from the Republican Party. So it was kind of like, oh, they were really successful with this. Let's, like, try to rip that off. Let's try to recreate that. And that was what they were doing to try to be successful, to try to kind of chip away at the red vote, if you will. And so Stacy, when she came in, had a completely different approach, which was basically, let's pause and evaluate kind of who we are, where we're at as a political party, and then let's build from there. And that was pretty unpopular. She basically got rebuked by her party. And I think that everybody was kind of just waiting for the tide to change. And they were hopeful that if they continued doing what they had been doing, then eventually things would change. And so basically, Stacy took textbooks that her parents used in their theology degrees, and she studied how do you start a church. And she used those ideas of how do you have a groundswell? How do you start in grassroots efforts to basically inform how she started to build back the Democratic Party. And, you know, the way that she was going to go about this was arduous, which was one voter at a time. And yeah, so anything there resonating with you, Kent? Like I hope our listeners are already like, okay, I kind of see the connections they're making
Right.
here.
Right. So a couple of things that resonated with me when when I was hearing this story, and I was like, that is athletic training 101. That's athletic training advocacy. That's how we hold ourselves. Was
Yes.
this idea when when Stacy Abrams started into politics, and the idea that the Democratic Party was going to go back to their last successful campaign and
Yeah.
do what worked however many years ago.
Yeah.
Like, let's just try to do that because that one moment in time it was successful.
Yes.
And I see that as a parallel. Like, we have, a successful campaign, or we make headway in one part of our work, and we
Yes.
go back to that well over and over and think that that strategy is going to work
Yeah.
again.
And
Right?
and I mean, to an extent, that's human behavior,
Right.
right? But I think that that is what is so revealing about what Stacey Abrams and her coalition, her movement, and the people that were around her, what is so interesting and maybe peculiar, and why I think she is a case study for us to look at, because she didn't take that approach.
Mhm.
And what stood out to me was she was meeting people where they were at.
Mhm.
And that is something that she needed to do in order to build trust.
Mhm.
She needed individual voters to believe in her and the plan that she was trying to execute. So, and she didn't do that in a let me stand on my pulpit, let me
Right.
just, use trickle down information. She legitimately was grassroots, groundswell. She was raising money and going out and basically getting on buses, getting on trains, getting on flights, showing up in the community and talking directly to people. And one by one, she turned a historically red state blue and elected two Democratic senators. And not 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 here to talk politics, red, blue,
Right.
Democrat, Republican. It really is just to say that she was up against a mountain that on paper she should not have been able to overcome. And that's why I wanted to investigate this and talk about it with you, because she took a different approach, and an approach that wasn't easy. It wasn't even really simple. I guess it could be simple, but it's something that she felt strongly about and decided, I'm not going to take no for an answer. I'm
Mhm.
going to do this. I'm going to rally people around me, and I am going to try something that hasn't been done before.
Yeah, and how many of us as athletic trainers have ever felt like we're up against a mountain?
Yes.
like here, like, and I want to go back for a quick second, because there were a couple other things that really recreating and borrowing. Like, and I think the borrowing even goes down to how we hold ourselves as athletic trainers and how we describe ourselves. How
Mm,
many times, and I'm guilty of this, how many times have we said, well, we're like a physical therapist mixed with an EMT?
yeah.
Like we're borrowing pieces of other people to
So
build who we
quickly.
are,
Yeah.
right? And that was a strategy that was used by the Democratic Party. We're going to borrow what Republicans stand for and try to
Yes.
rebrand it as
Yes.
as Democrat,
Or
as,
we're
as
just going to stand as the opposite of that and hope that it
right,
resonates. Right.
right, and I see that parallel when we describe ourselves to legislators or to stakeholders or
Yeah.
to our parents or to our friends.
Yeah.
We look for something that they may be familiar with. And I think building a bridge is a natural thing that we do as humans, but
Right.
we're building a bridge using not using us as humans or
Right.
using them as humans. We're building a bridge using another profession as the bridge.
Right. And that's the thing is, what you start to do in terms of affiliating is in their mind, you're making connections for them to an EMT, to a physical therapist, to a physician, to a nurse. And they're like, okay, so wait, what is it that you do? Like, I
Right,
still don't understand. And then we get frustrated, right? Because it's like,
right,
I've just explained it so clearly. I've given you models that you're familiar with and extracted pieces of it to say, well, I make up this whole, and yet really what we've done is just further confuse them, which
right,
I don't know if that specifically is what happened in the
right.
political party of things, but to the extent that attempting to recreate what has already been done
Mhm.
or borrowing in an effort to say, well, I'm kind of like this, but just different in this way, it really just creates more confusion for the
Mhm.
consumer, if you will.
Yeah, and where the movement not maybe not started, but where Stacy Abrams injected herself with reading the theology books from her parents. Like I go back to our conversation about a generalist and a specialist world, and
Yes.
like the Book of Range is like, what better example of how you can pull information and pull ideas from different topics or different segments that what are I mean politics and religion, there may be a connection there, but like how can you actually building a church
Yeah.
and building a movement, how are those things parallel?
Right.
And I thought that was I thought that was an interesting point that tied back to something else we talked about. And you know the other thing that that the movement in Georgia really hit home is that you have to know what you stand for. Like
Yes.
you have to get clear on what what do we stand for, and
Yes.
then go out and find the people right who stand with you,
Yeah.
and invite people on that movement with you. And from an athletic training perspective, as I was getting ready for this, I was standing in the shower reflecting, and I had this thought, like, do we know what we stand for? Like,
That's
are
where I
we
was going to go
too
with it.
like tribalized? Like we are the athletic training profession, but we have secondary school, college, university, physician practice
Settings, basically.
settings, right?
We've
So
been
so
broken up into the
essentially,
settings.
like what are the things, regardless of setting, that we stand for?
Hmm.
Because I can remember, in I can talk from my experience, but what I value as an athletic trainer who's an educator may be different than what an athletic trainer who works in the secondary school values.
And that's what I think is so important, right? So when you said, like, what is it that we stand for? I think the we is both an individual
Hmm.
and a collective question. But I don't think that we can answer the collective question without answering the individual question. And I have to know what I stand for. And that is both what I am in favor of and what I also am not willing to stand for. So there are things that I need to determine for me that I like, this is a cause I want to champion. Like I am a non traditional opportunities person. That's in how it presented itself in work, in education, in any of that kind of stuff. And I see Alejandra Merriman commenting here saying we don't even have core values, right? And I think that that's a perfect comment here. So
Hmm.
we need to find what it is that we are, what we stand for, what it is
Hmm.
that I champion. Then we can start to determine what is it that I'm willing to champion with someone else, right? So
Hmm.
Kent and Alicia love talking about personal development as professional development. Well, I would never be able to come along in my space with you if I didn't already know that like soft skills was something I
Hmm.
just loved internally. I wouldn't be able to talk about personal development as professional development if I didn't know that about myself. And then taking that out to more of a systems perspective, it's like looking at where we go in our careers and how we have retention and things like that. Like I can address that from a personal development, from a soft skills, from a non-traditional opportunities, because those are the things that I feel strongly
Mhm.
about. But I would never be able to arrive at that. How do I solve the world's problems, the profession's problems, if I don't even know what I stand for?
Yeah, it's both a macro and a micro, an individual and a collective, as you said. And they go hand in hand. And you know, as athletic trainers, I do think there is some professional identity development that should or could occur through education and as early career athletic trainers. And I don't know if it consistently is, because some people may not know what they stand for as an athletic trainer before they start.
Hmm.
And that's okay,
Yeah,
because we're all at a different part in our journey, but we
right.
have to at least be thinking about what that is,
Yeah.
if our goal is to influence the system.
Yes.
We've got to know where we are on the map
Yes.
in
Right.
in order to know how we can do our part to move the system forward, and find other people who may have similar ideas, and then we can put our ideas together and make a great idea, and we can do a lot of hard work, and then we can make change, right?
Totally.
Like and I also think, to with this is not a conversation about a professional organization.
Right.
This is a conversation about the profession.
Yes.
And so it can be something bigger than a professional organization, in terms of, it doesn't have to be like organizational values, or if you're a member
Right.
of this professional organization. It
No.
could be something like, in medicine they have the Hippocratic Oath, and
Yes.
that is not tied to any professional member organization like the AMA or anything like
Right.
that. That is
Right.
simply what individuals who enter medicine state as a commitment.
Yeah. And I
This
know
is
like
what I
legal
stand
has
for.
something similar. A lot of professional industry.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And the another, please stop me. I got it. When you were talking about meeting people where they were at and
Yeah.
doing it one by one, they were creating moments.
Mm.
Like, it wasn't like yeah, if you look on paper, it was 20 or 15 years. But
Yes.
really, was it 15 years, or was it 7 million moments?
Exactly.
Right? Like, it didn't matter how long it took. It mattered this interaction right now,
Right.
and this is the only thing that mattered. So I made a human connection with you,
Yes.
and I didn't just hand you a pamphlet, right?
Right.
And I was able to meet you where you were at, and
Yes.
respect where you were at, and
Yes.
have this moment and say, wow, we can connect. And then you have to just do that over and over and over and over again, even without seeing much change, because there's a period of time where there's not a critical mass, where
Right.
you're making change, but the change is not visible.
Yeah. And that's the thing, I think that that's what we either lose sight of or are impatient for, right?
Mhm.
So we kind of think that 15 years from now, like that's so far away, that's so long. Those 7,000 or 7 million probably moments that you're saying, like that's so many. And like, yeah, that's the point, right? Like,
Mhm.
I think that we're in a time right now professionally, a time of change, right? So there's a degree change that is happening. There is racial change that is happening. There is an economic change that is occurring right now. There's a socio-economic change that's happening, and and a healthcare change. And I feel like what's happening professionally is that we are the Democratic Party of 2010.
Mhm.
And are we willing to spend the next 10 years doing the work that is required so that we can be the Democratic Party of 2020? So that
Mhm.
we can wake up 10 years from now and say, wow, look at what we've done. We took the moments that we're in every single one of those days, months, years. And as a result of that, we are radically different. We turned a state, we turned a profession that was historically one way into something that people never thought was possible. And I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what that, I don't know what that necessarily means, because we're not a red and a blue. It's not like that. But I just am like inspired to consider what those moments look like for us, because you talk to so many people that have been around for decades and they say, what? We're fighting the same battles today that we were when I entered the profession. And these people are 20, 30, 40 retired, many years into this. And so I feel like Stacy Abrams is a case study that we can use to say, how do we make sure that we end up as the Democratic Party of 2020 if we're in the current 2010 state?
Yeah, and you said a couple of things that I think are really important for our viewers to understand. You use the word willing, right? Are we willing to do what it takes? There's a difference between wanting and willing.
Ooh.
Everyone wants to, but are you willing to? And I think that goes back to, are you willing to do the actual strategy, which is one by one, work in silence. You're not necessarily saying we need to be doing this because you're too busy doing it.
Yes.
And so willing, there are, willing is a key word because there are sacrifices and besides desire, it's changing desire into action.
Yep.
And then you also mentioned, this idea of time. And I believe we do need to reframe our understanding of time, because we only live in moments. And so let's say we've been doing this third-party reimbursement thing for 20 years, since year 2000, for example. Right? Well, we've done 20 hit the hills, right? So we've been doing this for 20 years. No, you've only had 20 one-day interactions.
Yes. Yes.
That's so you've only had 20 one-day moments.
Right.
And yes, some professional organizations have a political action committee, but there are 1,000 things that the political action committee does besides creating moments. And so it's really about, no, we haven't been doing it for 20 years. We may have only been doing it for 20 days and 20 half days. So we've only been doing it for 10 days.
Yep.
And if you want to break
over
that
the
down
span
further,
of 20 years, which when you take that into effect, the turnover of legislators, the way that economic things change, the way that political thing, it's like, that's a really good point. Actually, I like how you said that.
And while that's important, yes, we have been doing the same thing. We've been we've been trying for change, and we're addressing the same issues we had 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Not only do we need to be willing to change our strategy, we also need to be willing to go all in on our strategy with moments.
Yeah.
And we can't dabble, right? If we know what we stand for, we have a strategy, and we work in silence, and we go all in.
And this kind of reminds me of our conversation about, the infinite game and change in a profession, and honestly, even just like career endeavors, like they're almost intended to be things that we never accomplish, right? So a just cause, if we want to be the change we wish to see, if we want to push the profession forward, those are intentionally worded very broadly. They're intentionally meant to be phrased in ways that's like, it's not a single outcome, a single box that you check. It's not just something that you accomplish and you walk away from. And I want to bring back that idea of time, because I think a lot of times when we want to do something, we get overwhelmed and maybe even fearful of the amount of time that it will take. And I can tell you that as someone who has started businesses, grown businesses, worked with other people, like doing a business is the same thing as championing a cause. It's something that you believe in, you want to bring it to fruition. Your intention is to serve people, to put something out into the world that is a solution for a problem that you see. I can tell you that like time passes anyways. So you might as well be doing it on something that gives you life, that makes you feel like you're moving a little bit closer towards something that is your just cause.
Yes. Like what's the purpose, right? Like if time is going to move and we've chosen athletic training as something that we want to pursue, why not make use of it?
Yeah. And so, I mean, like, let's just talk a little bit about how we do this, because I
Okay,
don't want it to continue to remain like in theoretical aspects. I
great.
think one of the things, that Stacy did is like, we have to have individual conversations.
Mhm.
We have to talk to each other. And kind of going back to this idea of like starting with self, like, I need to know what it is that I stand for. And then I need to work on attracting other people who can either support me or that I can talk to about these things, and not from like a setting specific or even like a clicky type
Mhm.
thing. It's more so just like building momentum around the thing that is that you feel so passionately about.
Mhm. Yeah, life is all about momentum and getting quick wins, building momentum, streaking that momentum together.
Yeah.
And tying in another concept from the infinite game is that it doesn't have to be something that everyone's going to buy into or have take responsibility of right in the beginning.
Right.
You have innovators, early adopters, mainstream adopters, late adopters, and those people who are resistant
Yeah.
to whatever's happened. It doesn't matter if it's the newest iPhone
Right.
or any idea, right?
Yeah.
So don't feel. I think if you're an athletic trainer listening to this and you feel passionately and you feel purposeful about something,
Mhm.
you got to start having individual conversations,
Yeah, be intentional with it.
right?
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
have to be intentional about and start to develop some self-awareness of potentially your blind spots. We
Yes.
all have blind spots. And really starting with, like you said earlier, starting with yourself and saying, this is what I stand for and this is
Yeah.
what I don't stand for.
Right.
This is how I can use my gifts, talents, and abilities to drive forward or move closer to this just cause
Yeah.
through my purpose or through my
Right.
why.
Right. And I just want to take a moment to speak to anybody who is listening to this and they're like, I don't care about anything, or
Mm.
there's nothing that really does it for me. Because I don't want you to feel like you don't belong if that is you, or that you're somehow less than, or that you're not where you're supposed to be. If you're listening to this and thinking, I don't have that thing inside of me, because that's okay too. Like, not all of us are going to have something that we feel so passionately about that we are, going to stand on the mountaintop and shout.
Mhm.
But if that is you, you can be a supporter of somebody else's cause. And that, I think, is what comes back to what you are and are not willing to support. There are certain things that you are okay with and that maybe even kind of get you excited, even if you're not leading the cause. And there's other things where you're like, wow, I really don't agree with that. I really don't want to be a part of that. And it's important to know both of those for yourself. And I think even just kind of taking, I guess, just like a general poll, not literally polling, but like, sitting back and reviewing the landscape of like, what are the general frustrations of my peers, of my colleagues? What are my general frustrations
Mhm.
in my work, in my business? And then also, like, what are the desires? What are people saying that they want to move closer towards? And how do I feel about that? How do I feel like I could contribute to that? And sometimes contribution isn't literal. Sometimes contribution is, I'm willing to listen. I'm willing to share a post. I'm willing to show up at this event, at this webinar, at, whatever it is. So I think that I want to make sure that we're speaking to all audiences here, that this isn't just somebody who, feels lit up inside. There are also other people that are struggling to find what that is. And I still want you to feel empowered to engage in this conversation.
Yeah, you know, this idea, even if you haven't identified like this is a cause that I want to be a part of, just like you said, you can identify frustrations or friction points. A common one that I hear in early career athletic trainers is boundaries, like
Yeah.
boundary settings, and a lot of us want to set boundaries and keep them, but
Mhm.
are we willing to set
Right.
boundaries and keep them? Because there will be uncomfortable moments, there will be uncomfortable conversations, and even if it just starts with that,
Yeah.
because we have a broader conversation about life work integration
Yes.
and respect.
Mhm.
Even if you don't want to be the one at shouting from the mountaintop, but you feel strong, you feel something
Yeah.
with it, even if it's not strong,
Yeah.
that is contribution.
Yeah.
Contribution is simply saying, I'm going to turn off my phone.
Yes.
It, yeah.
I was like, no, 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 keep going, please.
No, no, go ahead. I was just searching. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah, I would say because that's part of managing expectations. And a lot
Mhm.
of why and how we've gotten to where we have in the profession, and we had a separate conversation about this, it might have been the leadership one or the generalist one, of how we've gotten to where we have, is because we don't stand up for ourselves. We've been like the yes woman, the person that will, you know, we know that everybody is always going to need our help. That is endless. That is a human aspect, right? Everybody is always going to need something. If you make yourself available, somebody will always take you up on it. And so it is our responsibility to say, not after 6 o'clock,
Mhm.
not on the weekend, please give me 24 hours notice. And we think that by continuing to offer more and more and more, whether that is of ourselves, of our time, of our expertise, that we are going to wake up and have a bigger salary, that we're going to be respected more, that we're going to have something different. And the
Mhm.
truth is it's the exact opposite, right? Like we need to, like you're saying, manage those expectations, hold those boundaries, and find ways to stand up for ourselves as professionals. And this looks different for everybody, right? Like we're only giving one example, and um you can find what this looks like for you. But I think that is the important part, is that you start with yourself. This does not need to be any bigger, any louder, any more extravagant than simply, I'm going to turn my phone off at 6 o'clock. I am going to ask for 24 hours notice of a schedule change. I am going to start documenting patient outcomes. Like it doesn't have to be a large campaign that happens once a year. It doesn't have to be flashy. It doesn't have to even
Mhm.
really be sexy. Like,
Right.
none of the work that is done in silence is sometimes the most impactful. And I think that Stacy Abrams is an example of that. I know that media has covered her a little bit between 2010 and 2020, but for the most part, she emerged on the scene when she ran for governor back in 2018. She lost, and she kind of went quiet again, for people who
Mhm.
weren't living in Georgia. And now all of a sudden, this work that she's done is, what people would see like an overnight success. And
Mhm.
really it has happened over 15 years. And I think
Mhm.
that is what we're encouraging people here to do, is take it from somebody who was successful. Take it from somebody who was willing to go against the grain, who was able to grassroots groundswell somebody, and a lot of people, by having individual conversations and starting with meeting people where they're at.
Mhm. And the, you know, there may be moments when you feel uncomfortable. And part of that is reframing what uncomfortable means, right? Uncomfortable does not mean you're doing something wrong.
True.
Uncomfortable means you're doing something different. And and if we use the boundaries example, we use many examples of the frustrations that are common in athletic training. It may feel counter to our culture,
Yeah.
and it may be, and and that's okay, because that's the way it has been done, and that's the way we may have found success 30
Right.
years ago, was
Yes.
being over available. But
Yes.
that doesn't mean that's the well we have to go back to be
Right.
successful. We can do something that's different
Yep.
and work through that. And you made an excellent point that it may not always be successful. Stacy Abrams is a great example of that. She wasn't successful in her, well, she wasn't immediately successful in her run for governor.
Yeah.
She wasn't, like, that's just, she wasn't.
Right. She didn't win the election.
She didn't win the
She failed.
election. Right.
Yeah.
She failed.
Yeah.
But the energy and the movement that she had created and the work that she had done, and then the grace and the humility that she had to go straight back to work,
Right.
to say that this wasn't about me. It wasn't about me becoming the governor.
Mhm.
Yes, that would have been great. Like, I would have been, I don't know, maybe she would have said that would have been great if I was governor. But
Sure.
it wasn't about that. It was
And
about more than that.
yeah, and actually in that podcast, and we'll link it here, she specifically said that that governor run, she absolutely wanted to be governor, but that was an opportunity for her to test out how far they had come in their attempts to stop suppressing the Black vote. And even in that election, there was questions as to the legitimacy of the voting, but that was a test case for her to see, I've been doing this for 8, 10, 12 years. How far have we come? And that was, kind of a litmus for her to see, okay, now in 2 more years, we have another election. And I think she gained a lot of ground in those 2 years. And so, yeah, I think just kind of bringing it back to the central topic here, I think continuing to do what we've always done is safe and it's comfortable, but in our profession, and I think using the Democratic and Republican Party, or the Democratic Party of 2010 is an example of why it's worth trying something else. And it might be that this is a case study that goes down in history as something that can never be replicated, and that's perfectly possible, but I want to try. I want to find out if our profession, by taking an individual approach, by remaining nimble, by doing grassroots efforts, by not simply focusing on a national organization or a national project or a single campaign per year, if we can effectively create change in our personal careers, our personal lives, and thereby changing what this profession looks like 10 years from now.
I'm willing to walk with you on that journey.
Yay!
Let's keep walking.
Well, I don't really need one other person. Really, all I need is me, but I think it is compelling and helpful when you have other people that are willing to walk alongside you. And I think for each person that is out there, this path is different, right? Like every single one of us have different things that we champion. And I really just hope that this is an opportunity for you, the listener, to reconsider what that looks like. That it doesn't have to be something outward. It doesn't have to even involve an external stakeholder. It really can just start with you. And I don't mean to say just there. It can start with you, and it should start with you.
I've got nothing more to add.
Well, that's pretty good if I've stumped Kent.
Yeah. I couldn't have said it better.
I wanted to share one other comment that was left here. Morgan says, the work that is done in silence is sometimes the most impactful, which was something that I said, and I think is
Mhm.
absolutely a quote to take away from this. So it's been awesome to do this as always. I hope that more people are able to watch the recording of this, because I think that we have a real opportunity here. And
Mhm.
I am hopeful that if enough individual people hear this message, they will feel empowered to
Mhm.
do that investigation themselves and start doing the micro actions
Mhm.
that we rely on each one of us to do to move the needle forward in the profession.
Yeah. And if this message touched you, or if you felt inspired by this message, share it and do the work.
Yeah.
Like, I think that would be my ask.
Mm,
Would be, even if this cause isn't the same cause that you feel passionately about or you feel purposeful about, if what we talked about tonight touched you or you were inspired by that, take some action, share it, and have a conversation,
yeah.
because that's how all of these start.
Absolutely. And if you want further clarification, if you want someone to bounce off of, reach out to us. We're
Mhm.
available. We're individuals too. And as we've said here, like we can do it alone, but it's a lot lonelier and it's a lot harder to build momentum with single entities. So yeah, we're available. And again, just another moment of encouragement here, that start with yourself, and don't feel like it's bigger than you. Don't feel like you're too small, that you're insignificant. You absolutely are not. You are everything that you need in order to get started on
Mhm.
this.